Pulse Engine is a unique MIDI generator to produce intricate, complicated rhythms, melodies, and bespoke ornamentation that would be very difficult to produce or play any other way, especially by hand. Pulse Engine is a MIDI effect and therefore must be placed prior to instruments, which translate MIDI signal into sound. To install Pulse Engine, double-click to open the zip file it came in. From there, we recommend dropping the entire folder somewhere into Live's user library, ideally the presets MIDI effects folder. However, the utilities, which includes our global hub device, you may wish to place in your audio effects preset folder. The important thing is to drop it into your user library so that it will be ingested and indexed for other categories in Live's browser. Once there, you can open the folder and navigate to the presets and MIDI effects folder. Here you will find 16 presets that come with Pulse Engine, but most importantly, the device itself is in the Max MIDI effect folder, pulseengine.amxd. I will begin this demonstration using it on the hi-hats here in a drum rack. It will be placed automatically prior to the hi-hat sample-based instrument on that pad of the drum rack. Now, before playing anything back or examining Pulse Engine, I would like to configure the global hub and set it to a blues scale. This ensures that any other manifest audio MIDI effects dragged into the set will automatically adopt that blues scale in the key of, let's switch to D. Now you'll see that as I have done that, on the Pulse Engine, it has also inherited that scale and key. Being percussive, I do not wish this particular instance to be in a scale, so I will pin it locally, allowing me to make changes independent of the global hub, and set it back to a chromatic scale, at which point the key is irrelevant. Now, just quickly looking at the global hub, I should mention that I've placed it on the master track as part of my default template. It's followed by the Manifest Audio time zone utility, an easy and handy way to calculate timings, pitches, BPMs, and that's available for free from our website. Global Hub comes for free with all our paid devices, and neither of them actually process the audio whatsoever. The signal passes directly through them, so it's fine to place them after the limiter that I've also placed on my master track as part of my default template. But of course, today we're here to examine Pulse Engine, so let's get back to that. On the hi-hat pad of the drum rack, we can see 5 areas. On the left, we have our play, pause, blend, or solo. Blend is important when you want incoming MIDI to be passed through in addition to pulses generated. In this case, I'm strictly going to use Pulse Engine to generate all the material, so I'll leave it in solo. And we have free playback, which ignores incoming MIDI in terms of when pulses are triggered. Gate, which only plays back pulses along with MIDI note on messages, gated out by note off messages. Side mode being the inverse, only playing between note on messages when there are no notes playing. And note mode works similar to gate mode, but also chooses the variance randomization, which we'll get into soon. We'll examine these modes in practice later on. The MIDI note and velocity simply display the incoming MIDI note and velocity values. To explain the next section, it'd probably be good to have some pulses being generated. So all I need to do is start Live's transport. And it might be good to hear this along with a beat. So I'll trigger the electro pattern underneath. And what is happening essentially is the rate of pulses generated at the pitch of C3 is randomizing by this variation amount, 50%, within this range of maximum and minimum, and the chance that the pulse rate will vary is triggered at this span, currently every quarter note. So every quarter note, there's a 50% chance that the rate between a maximum of 30-second notes and a minimum of half-note triplets will be randomized. And the pulse percentage is the chance that pulses will be triggered. If I don't want pulses to be triggered every quarter note span, I can reduce this. And if I want them to change every quarter note span, I can increase the variance. The length of the pulses triggered will by default be the same as the current rate in rate mode multiplied by this length. Which, with the hi-hat in single voice mode, might result in some gating at longer lengths. So we can make the notes very short or much longer. We can also set the length of each triggered note to a fixed rate value. So I might set these to 128th notes, so very short, or I can set it to something longer. Finally, we have the chaos mode, which allows us to randomize the length of the pulses. And there's a hold variation as well, which will not be very useful with this sound, but we'll explore it with something a little bit more melodic later on. We can, of course, change the pitch of generated pulses, and I've set it back to the default of C. Now, these are randomizing a little too slowly, so I think I will set the minimum rate, the slowest it can go, to 16th note dotted, and I'll set the maximum to 64th notes. Now, I'm not hearing anything with the configuration of the hi-hat because the time multiplier is too long, and there we go, we're back in action. Now, at the top is a menu that allows us to specify the different types of timing values that are available. So full range includes all dotted, triplet, and straight note values. But I can also say, I don't want any triplets, restricting it to dotted and straight values. Or I can say no dotted, restricting it to triplet and straight values. I can also set it to straight values, eliminating all dotted and triplet values. I can also say I don't want any straight or dotted and set it to all triplets, giving it that trademark triplet push groove feel. I can switch it likewise to all dotted. So it's going to be all dotted counts at whatever rate interval is selected. And we can combine the triplets and dotted in the no straight mode, so we will never have any straight note value timings. It will strictly be dotted and triplet values. This can produce some very intricate and interesting timings. I can also set the span rate to a slower value, so now it will only change every half bar. Or I could set it to a narrower value, say every 8th note dotted. And finally, if I set it to manual mode, this gives me full automation control of the rate value. To avoid long-standing known issues with Max for Live and the undo history, any of the other modes which are subject to randomization mean that the rate is not available for automation, modulation, or assigning to macro or MIDI controllers. So if you want to control the rate manually, then you can do so here, which then finally opens the rate value up to automation and mapping. But of course, it's not changing anymore unless you change it manually. So to really produce some intricate rhythms, I think I will set it on no triplets. And it's going a little too fast there. And we'll let it go down to 1/8 notes. Maximum 30 seconds should be good. Let's add a little bit of chaos to the velocity. So not all the pulses are playing at the same intensity. And I can constrain that randomization to a range. And the base value is sort of the original value that velocity will be randomized from. We have some display at the bottom right, just kind of monitoring the output values, note length, note pitch, and current velocity. So to explore the pitch, LFO, and velocity, I think it would make sense to use an instance of Pulse Engine on a more melodic element. So I have a very basic wavetable set up here. And as I drag another instance of Pulse Engine prior to it, being a MIDI effect, it must be dragged prior to the instrument, of course. I don't need to actually see the wavetable. So currently I'm letting it generate all of the notes, and I think I need to constrain the ranges a bit. I think I will say and you'll notice, of course, it inherited that D blues scale from the global hub. So as those are being generated, I can do some quite expressive stuff just manipulating the pitch dial. Now, if I increase the hold amount, this is the chance that certain notes will be held, producing those moments of classic glide. Can be quite expressive. Now this is set to internal pitch mode. We'll explore receive mode soon enough. We can induce some chaos to randomize the notes within that scale, key, and minimum maximum ranges. Now I'll reduce the chaos to demonstrate the pitch add, which means that within each quarter note triggered cluster of pulses, we can add a certain note value in transposition with each subsequent pulse. Or subtract, of course, the negative values. So you can hear those notes cascading down. And if I set this to a longer span, turn the hold off there. So we get these cascading ripples of notes going up or down. I think I will switch to this house pattern to really hear what's going on a little better, and maybe put the pause on that on the other Pulse Engine. So now I can induce a little chaos along with the let's do 3 semitones up being added. And of course I can automate or modulate the pitch and assign it to a macro. But you may have noticed that we also have an LFO. And to really hear the power of that, I'll set the chaos and addition back to 0. And I will begin to add some LFO amount measured in semitones. And I can increase the LFO rate, or of course, set it to BPM. Let's make it a 4-bar triangle. We've of course got saw up and down, square, random, and bin. with jitter for a bit of randomness, and smoothing to take off any sharp edges from a pulse, or to make the randomness of the jitter more smooth, for example. But with a triangle, I don't really need any jitter or smoothing. The point is, we can now hear the pitch being pulled up on that contour of a triangle every 4 bars. Then within that contour, I can still adjust the bass pitch, and it continues to go up and down within the scale and key. I can also induce a little chaos within the confines of that contour of the LFO. And also impose some additive transposition, which will become a little more apparent perhaps if I set a higher maximum rate. Now the LFO can be re-triggered with incoming MIDI notes and manually re-triggered via this button here. I think I will likewise induce a bit of randomness on the velocity to make it a little more interesting. And I can also have the velocity controlled by the LFO, and both the pitch and velocity LFO assignments have an adjustable phase, so I can offset them so that while they're following the same contour, they're not exactly synchronized. So this makes it a little bit more interesting. I think I'll disable the LFO and the chaos briefly to demonstrate the velocity decay, which within each pulse cluster, which is a group of pulses triggered every span, or incoming note in note mode, the velocity decay will pull the velocity values down until a new pulse cluster is triggered. So right now I'm in internal pitch mode, where I completely control the pitch by this dial. But I think I'll set it to receive mode here, and switching over turns the pitch bass dial into a transposition dial. And now I can write a brief transposition pattern into this MIDI clip here. I want it to be a bit longer. Let's do 2 bars. Something like that in D blues. I think that will work. Now, if I trigger it, it will transpose it, but we're also going to hear it because it's in blend mode, which with the monophonic setting on wavetable means it's basically going to be like a held note the entire time. So I think I'll turn the hold percentage off and set it to solo mode. And I'll turn the LFO off. And I suppose that last note does not fit in the blues scale, so maybe I'll bring this up. And we can hear those pulses being transposed. We're only hearing the pulses because it's set to solo mode, and it's receiving that MIDI in as the bass pitch, which I could transpose up or down in semitone. So I think I will continue to capture that pattern an octave below with a bit of LFO and a bit of additive transposition and just a touch of chaos. I think maybe it deserves a little reverb. To demonstrate the next mode, it would be good to duplicate this transposition clip And I'll select all the notes and simply shorten them so that we've got these gaps between. And what I'll do now is set this to gate mode. So pulses are only going to play while notes are held. If I trigger the new clip, you can see that they're effectively muted in between those notes, but they're still being transposed because it is in receive mode. If I toggle out of receive mode, it goes back to the last pitch I'd set it to. Now, if I set it to side mode, we're hearing it in between the pulses, still receiving the transposition, which I can toggle off and on via the receive internal mode. Now, these side and gate modes are excellent for sort of creating conversations between different instances of Pulse Engine. So you can do some very dynamic, intricate programming, which I might as well demonstrate now. So I will create a new track with an instance of analog, perhaps. And I will set it to a lower volume there. And I think I'm going to want to pan these separately. Now I want another instance of Pulse Engine here. I'll drag the AMXD in, and it will just begin spitting some stuff out. And I think I'll set it up 2 octaves. There we go. And I'll give it some chaos. Now, the important thing to create the sort of conversation I had just advertised is to tell it to receive MIDI from that wavetable track, but not post effects. Otherwise, it will be interpreting everything coming out of that Pulse Engine. So I actually want to set it to pre-effects. So it's just going to receive from this clip. And now, having done that, this wavetable is in side mode. So I will set this one to gate mode. And I'm increase the variance and set the range quite rapid. And it's receiving that MIDI in, so I need to also set it to solo mode, of course. So, what have I done? Essentially, this pattern, which has those quarter note gaps in between it, are triggering the wavetable during the gaps, which is also being transposed, and triggering the analog during the notes, which is having some additive chaos and these sort of things. And I think I'll set the range much higher there. And it's a little too loud. Now these two little characters are having a bit of a conversation. But it's a little much. It's a little over the top. So I'm just gonna hit the pause button here and demonstrate one of my favorite ways to use Pulse Engine, which is to produce some interstitial, sort of occasional ornamentation to add a bit more dynamic to some other elements. So I'm going to stop this clip, and because it's in side mode, there's no note ons gating it out, so it's just going to continue freely. And actually, I think I want to leave it in this mode, but I'm going to set to a much higher pitch. And I'll set the chance of it playing to something quite a bit lower. Now I'm going to hit the pause button and set it to blend mode so that we can get some MIDI going through it. And I'm going to take that MIDI from an instance of Pattern Engine, which I can grab from my Generative collection. This, of course, is our flagship sequencer, and it will also automatically adopt the scale and key set by Global Hub on the master track. So it's already going to be set to the D blues scale. How nice is that? So I will just click this dice button to instantly randomize a sequence. I'd like to increase the randomization amount before I do so. So there's a nice sequence going, and I'm just going to minimize it and minimize the wavetable as well. And I'll set the pulse to 0% so we can press play on the pulse engine and begin fading that pulse amount in. And I think it would be useful to have a much faster rate on these. So there we go, we got a nice little bit of ornamentation. And I can add a little bit of hold percentage here, just so we can hear a little more going on. I'll increase the pulse percentage. And because it's in side mode, it's not going to interrupt the notes that are coming through from the sequencer. It's going to play in between them. Now, if I set it to note mode, every incoming MIDI note is when a new pulse sequence is generated and triggered. So the span is removed because a new variance randomization of the rate is triggered with each new note on message. But I think this was working best in side mode, so I'll set it back to that. The note mode, though, is very useful for creating intricate patterns, which I might demonstrate briefly after this. Now, this is producing some really interesting stuff, and I might want to capture it. The problem with generative tools is that you can induce them to produce very dynamic stuff within whatever rules you determine, but it's difficult to rely on them. So, for consistent results, you need to capture them. So, by creating a new audio track, I can, of course, record this as audio, capturing audio from the wavetable, arming it to record, and there we go. So it's recorded all those interstitial pulses in, but I think I would like to add a new MIDI track. And in this case, I do want the MIDI to receive from the wavetable post effects, not pre-effects. I want it post effects because I want it to capture everything from both the pattern engine and the pulse engine. So arm that to record. And we can see those pulse ripples being additively transposed, decaying in velocity at a very short timing rate, short note length. And so then this can be harnessed, edited, and used, of course, with any other instrument you might wish to experiment with. The last thing I will demonstrate is using the note mode to construct a more elaborate rhythmic pattern. So I will set this, yes, something like this. So now instead of triggering at a regular interval, a regulated metric interval, a new span with the possibility of variation of the rate will be triggered here and then here and so on and so forth. In order to really hear this, I will simply pause the pattern engine and set this to note mode. And there are no notes being played, so to really hear what's going to happen, I'll finally trigger this newly created clip. I have to deactivate the pattern engine to allow the MIDI through. Now it's in blend mode, so it's being held along with those, so I'll put it to solo mode. And so now we can see the rate changing at the intervals of this note pattern. It's also transposing along with them in receive mode. I'm gonna move that transposition down. And I could then, of course, capture this as MIDI as well. It might be useful to increase the pulse chance and reduce that minimum rate. And it seems to me that additive rippling is a little intense. So this has been a look at Pulse Engine, its many modes and capabilities, all packed into a small little package that's deceptively powerful, generating musical ideas that would be very difficult to come up with any other way, while also interacting with other components via the unique modes and allowing for unique expressivity through automation of the pitch, the rate in manual mode, and deep programmability as well through transposition and receive mode and note mode span rates with, of course, the motion of an LFO, velocity control, length control, and many other features that are demonstrated throughout the included presets. Pulse Engine is available now from our website, manifest.audio.